Once you master this tart, I can guarantee you'll be making it again and again. It's always a hit. Hi everyone, I'm Astrid from The Sweet Rebellion, and today we're going to be making a chocolate salted caramel tart, one of my favorite desserts. This tart has got a crisp chocolate pastry shell, a gooey salted caramel layer, and a rich chocolate ganache. Totally delicious. For this recipe you'll need 1 batch of my delicious salted caramel. We've already made this in a previous video. If you missed it, you can find the link here. And for the remaining ingredients you'll need 160 grams of flour, 30 grams of cocoa, 35 grams of almond flour, 50 grams of icing sugar, teaspoon of vanilla essence, 1 to 2 tablespoons of ice water, 110 grams of cold butter, 1 large egg, 125 grams of chocolate, and 125 ml of cream. So the first thing we need to do is make our pastry. But as you guys know, I like to blitz up my chocolate for the ganache first so that I don't need to clean out the food processor later. So I'm just using a good quality dark chocolate for the ganache. Because the rest of the tart is quite sweet, I don't want to use a milk chocolate because overall I think it's just going to be too sweet. So to make our pastry, we're just going to add our flour, cocoa, icing sugar, and ground almonds to our food processor and give that a good blitz first before we add our other ingredients. After we've combined our dry ingredients, we're going to add our cold butter, and I like to have it in cubes just so that it mixes nice and evenly. So I'm just going to blitz this again until I've got a nice crumbly texture. So next we're going to add our egg and vanilla essence. Now at this stage we've got to be a little bit careful that we don't overmix our pastry. If we do, the pastry is going to be quite tough and it will also shrink on baking. If your pastry hasn't come together nicely like this, then at this stage you can add about a teaspoon of ice water at a time, mixing just a little bit in between until it comes together. If you add too much water, you're going to have a sticky pastry and you're going to have to use a lot of flour to roll it out. And then your pastry is going to be tough and way too floury. Now we need to chill our pastry for at least 30 minutes. The reason we do this is because we've worked the gluten and we now need to let it rest and relax so that we've got a nice tender pastry. So I'm just going to shape my pastry into a nice flat disc like this, and I like to make it quite flat so that later on when I need to roll the pastry out, I don't need to work so hard. So the next step now is to roll out our chilled pastry. Today I'm going to be using a long tin like this, a rectangular tin, but you can also use a 23 centimeter round tin for this recipe. I've actually got a metal rolling pin, which is quite handy because you can chill this in the fridge or freezer before you use it, and it also prevents your pastry from sticking to the rolling pin. So now I'm just going to gently ease my pastry into the tin and push it into the fluted edges. So make sure your pastry is quite thin. We only want it to be about 2 millimeters thick. So once we've pushed our pastry nice and firmly into our tin, I like to give it just one little roll over with the rolling pin just to neaten the edges. So as you can see, we do have a fair bit of pastry left over, but you can just wrap this in some cling wrap and pop it in the freezer and use it to make a tart or even some chocolate cookies another day. So now I'm going to bake this pastry blind, which means that we're going to prick it with a fork, put a layer of baking paper, and then top it with something heavy like baking beans, or what I've got here is just a mixture of rice and lentils. And you can use these over and over again for baking. You obviously can't cook them once you've used them. Just store them in an airtight container and you can use it next time you make a tart. The reason we blind bake our pastry is just in case there's any little air pockets in the pastry that are going to bubble up. So we want something heavy to weigh it down while we bake it. So we're going to bake it like this for 15 minutes at 180 degrees, and then we're going to remove our baking beans or rice and bake it uncovered for another 15 minutes just to get nice and crisp. So next we're going to make our chocolate ganache. What really helps when making ganache is to have nice finely chopped chocolate. That just really helps it to heat nice and evenly when we add our hot cream. So now I'm just going to heat my cream until it's just starting to boil and then pour that over my chocolate. So like we did in our chocolate ganache tart video, we just want to let this stand for about a minute after adding the hot cream. And that's just so that all the little bits of chocolate heat nice and evenly. If you start stirring straight away, you'll generally end up with a bit of a lumpy ganache. If you've made your salted caramel earlier, like I have, it will be set quite thick. So what helps is just to pop it in a bowl of warm water and stir it around until it gets a little bit thinner and more spreadable. This will just make it easier to pour into our tart shell. So now our pastry is baked, and it's baked beautifully. What you can see is that it shrunk away from the size of the tin, which is going to make it really nice and easy to remove later on. What you don't want with your pastry is when it shrinks down, because then you end up with a really short little edge, and we need to fill it up with lots of gooey caramel. After letting your pastry cool completely in the tin, you can transfer it to your serving platter. I find it a lot easier to assemble the tart if I've removed it from the tin first. Here's a fun little tip for you guys. If you find that your chocolate ganache has lots of bubbles on the surface, you can just use a blowtorch to pop them and get a nice, smooth, shiny ganache. Now we're going to pop our tart into the fridge for about an hour until everything is nice and set. Let me know in the comments what occasion you'd make this dessert for. And there you have it, the most delicious chocolate salted caramel tart. This makes such a great showstopper dessert if you're having some friends around. And now we get to slice into it. If you make this at home, please remember to tag me on social media. I'd love to see how your chocolate salted caramel tarts turned out.